Chinese President Xi Jinping meets with U.S. President Donald Trump in Florida. How will their meeting impact China-U.S. relations? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The much-anticipated first meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump is taking place. The Chinese leader and First Lady Peng Liyuan were greeted by the American President and First Lady Melania Trump when they arrived just a short time ago at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. During President Xi Jinping's two-day visit, the presidents are expected to discuss major issues like trade and security. We begin with Wang Guan, Chief Political Correspondent for CGTN's Mandarin service, who joins us now from Palm Beach in Florida. And Wang Guan, the Chinese president and his wife arrived at the Trump estate, Mar-a-Lago, earlier this evening. Can you bring us up to date on what's happened so far?
Well, the latest thing we got, Anand, was the menu for tonight. Actually, the welcoming banquet hosted by President Trump and Melania Trump are going on. They're welcoming the visiting Chinese President Xi Jinping and the First Lady of China, Madame Peng Liyuan. Here's the menu I'm looking at. The Caesar salad to start with, and they also have pan-seared Dover sole, a kind of fish, potatoes for the main course. President Trump had this for President Xi, new dry-aged prime New York strip steak, and also followed by dessert and 2014 Cabernet. It's a real banquet, and hopefully President Xi and Madame Peng will like it. And more importantly, it's about the business. As casual as this all may look, it's about business. The two leaders hope to set strategic goals for this relationship. They're two busy men, so they have a lot to tackle within 24 hours. They may not touch every single issue or go to the details of the issue. After all, they have about 12 consultation mechanisms, lower-level working groups to iron down those details. But for today and tomorrow, hopefully, they would like to tackle some of the broader issues, strategic issues, set a tone for the direction in which they want U.S.-China relationship to go in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
So what's on the schedule for Friday? Are there any specifics?
Well, so far, we're working our sources from the Chinese delegation. So far, what I've learned is that tonight it will be a relatively relaxed schedule. The form of what's on the agenda was this welcoming banquet that is going on. For tomorrow, the two leaders will have meetings with their key cabinet members, staffers on both sides, both small-scale meetings and large-scale bilateral meetings, followed by, around 12 o'clock. They may or may not have some press availability. We're still waiting for White House to confirm on that. And in the afternoon, President Xi will leave Mar-a-Lago and go back to Beijing.
Thanks, Wang Guan. We'll get back to you in a moment. Well, let me bring in Dennis Wilder here. He is a former special assistant to George W. Bush and former senior director for East Asian Affairs at the National Security Council. Dennis, welcome to the show. We heard earlier the U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, say that this meeting provides an opportunity to exchange frank views, candid views. What are your expectations?
I don't think you can overstate this meeting. This is one of the most important meetings that President Trump has had since he came into office. There's been a lot of rhetoric, particularly on the U.S. side, about what China needs to do, what he's anticipating, what he expects. But this meeting is really a chance for the two men to get to know each other, to take the measure of each other, to air some of these differences, but to also try and find the common ground that they have to have as the two world-leading powers.
Okay, I will get back to you and Wang Guan in a moment, but first, let's get the thoughts of U.S. Congressman Rick Larsen. He has visited China several times and is the co-chair of the bi-partisan U.S. China Working Group. I sat down with him earlier today at his office on Capitol Hill. Congressman Larsen, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
This meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Trump takes place very early in the Trump presidency. How significant and important is it for both these countries?
Well, I think it's a very significant meeting because the two presidents are going to have at least a full day to get some measure of each other. I don't expect a lot of major announcements from the meeting, but this is one of the first meetings between the two of them. They've exchanged phone calls, exchanged letters, but I think it's significant because the U.S. China relationship is very important for us, it's very important for China, and having the two presidents meeting this early in the administration's time frame means that they want to spend more time over the next 3.5 years to further develop it.
So this is a meeting where they get to know each other. How important are personal relations between these two leaders as they move forward for their mutual benefit?
I think generally personal relations between leaders of countries is important, but it actually can't be the deciding factor in success of any relationship because countries have their own national interests they want to pursue, and those may not change, but leaders do come and go, especially in the United States. And so I think it's important that at a minimum, President Trump outlines what some of those current interests are from our perspective, from the U.S. perspective, so that President Xi then knows kind of what's on the mind of the American people.
There will be lots to talk about, the U.S. position on Taiwan, trade issues, security issues. What are your expectations?
Well, my expectations for what happens at the summit and after the summit is essentially that both countries and both leaders begin to build their own foundation on mutual trust, their own foundation to build what the Chinese call win-win situations, what we would call sort of results of compromise and discussion. But I think that having any kind of big breakthrough on any one issue is probably too much to ask this early in the administration.
President Trump has been talking very tough on trade issues when it comes to China. He's initially accused China of being a currency manipulator. He's talked about imposing tariffs on the imports of Chinese goods into the United States. How does the President of the United States get past that kind of language in these negotiations with the Chinese leader?
I don't know how he gets past that language. He's going to either have to stick with it or he's going to have to back away from it. You've seen some of the people he's appointed backing away from taking action to, say, designate China as a currency manipulator. And in fact, I think the numbers are pretty clear when it comes to the currency manipulation issue that much of what the United States has wanted out of China and China's currency has occurred over the last several years. And so I think that's a tough argument for him to make. I think on trade dispute, I think that the Chinese should expect in the future that much like what the Obama administration did, trying to develop cases to take to the WTO, I think that this administration will continue that policy. But I also think that there's been a pullback a little bit from the administration because the campaign rhetoric was very strong, and now they're in responsibility of leadership, and you're seeing, well, if you do follow up on the rhetoric, campaign rhetoric of trade, what will that mean for U.S. businesses and, more importantly, for U.S. workers? And I think the answer to that is that would probably harm U.S. workers and U.S. business.
Let's look at one important security issue, and those are the missile tests being carried out by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. President Trump has just said days ago that if China doesn't act, he said, we will, the United States will act unilaterally. What happens at this summit? How do they deal with that particular issue?
Well, I think that generally in Congress, I can tell you that there's a sense that China can do more, ought to do more, both in terms of rhetoric, in terms of any personal leverage they have over the leadership and the regime in North Korea, as well as on sanctions or taking economic action unilaterally itself against North Korea. I think as well, though, that the rhetoric in the U.S. Coming out of the Pentagon, from Secretary Mattis, coming from Secretary Tillerson, and of course from President Trump, is an accurate reflection of the frustration that we in Congress have over the last 20 years and the lack of progress on trying to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. I am concerned here in the U.S. that we may be getting away from that, policy of having a nuclear-free peninsula. There's been some discussion about reintroducing nuclear weapons onto the peninsula that were pulled out in the late 90s, in the 80s, early 90s. I think that that's a bad move. It would be a terrible move on our part. So I think that the president needs to be clear that we are impatient. We're impatient with North Korea. We're impatient with China because we believe China can do more. I also think that impatience is showing up at the UN Security Council, and needing the Security Council to do more as well.
The Chinese would argue that they have already done quite a bit. The Foreign Minister Wang has put a proposal on the table, the so-called double suspension proposal, where the DPRK stops its tests, and in return the United States and South Korea stop its joint exercises. China has imposed sanctions. They stop coal imports from the DPRK into China. What does America want?
Well, we're not going to stop exercises with a treaty ally. South Korea is a treaty ally. Republic of Korea is a treaty ally of the United States. So we are not going to stop military exercises. And the Minister Wang Yi's proposal really does, I think, ignore the fact that North Korea is the one building missiles. North Korea is the one doing nuclear weapons tests. This is not a U.S. or South Korea problem. We have not caused it. North Korea is pursuing the nuclear weapons program. There is nothing that I can think of that says we should tolerate that and give something up until we see, much like we tried to do in the past, until we see North Korea take real concrete steps. So it's not sort of a thing where we take steps at the same time, that is North Korea and U.S. take steps at the same time. We need to see North Korea take steps first, and we haven't seen that.
Let's talk about climate change. Here we have two countries, the United States and China, that fully embraced the Paris Accord. In fact, they pushed that accord in Paris. Now, the United States under President Trump is not so keen on that accord. President Trump has talked about not implementing some of the provisions that were passed in that accord. China, of course, is very keen to see those provisions being implemented. Climate change very important to China. What happens?
The climate change agreement occurred because U.S. and China were able to come together from different angles, from different paths, but to the same goal. And that was to control global CO2 emissions, get a handle on climate change. That's why the climate change treaty passed. It got rid of the excuses other countries were using. That excuse was, well, U.S. and China, you're the largest emitters of pollution. You're not doing anything, therefore we don't have to do anything. And now the Trump administration says they want to back out of those commitments. I think that's a terrible mistake. I hope that other countries, all parties to the agreement, will continue to move forward, while we in the United States try to work to get this administration to honor the commitments. And it's not just because the climate change agreement is really one of the, I think, a landmark legacy of the Obama administration, and the relationship, a legacy of the Obama-Xi relationship. But it's also because climate change is real, it is human caused, and we need to take action on it. We need to take our responsibility in taking action on it. What I've tried to press, even when the climate change agreement was announced, what I've always tried to press is the economic benefit to the United States. We have companies and technology and innovative people in our country who are ready, willing, and able to assist other companies, other people, and other countries to meet the challenges of climate change. We have a potential for a huge economic benefit from the climate change agreement, and maybe President Trump will listen to that argument.
Let's move on to one other big security issue, that is the South China Sea. One of President Trump's senior advisors, Steve Bannon, said war against China is inevitable over the next 5 to 10 years on this particular issue. Does it worry you when you hear that kind of language?
It does worry me, but Steve Bannon is wrong. We are not going to go to war with China over the South China Sea. We do believe that we have a different view of the South China Sea that is more consistent with all the other countries around the South China Sea. And do believe that to address those issues, we will continue what we call our freedom of navigation operations to show that the United States believes that the seas are a common space, that any and all countries, including China, are free to use the seas and have that freedom to navigate. But it is troubling that President Xi at some point said that the parcels of land that they are creating in the South China Sea would not be militarized, and yet they have militarized them. For whatever reason, they can say they're defensive or offensive, or they're just weapons, but they are. It is militarizing those areas, and that is deeply concerning as well. I think in the end, the United States ought to be supportive of the countries around the South China Sea. And my personal view is that if those countries are able to negotiate in good faith with each other on developing the natural resources in the South China Sea to their mutual benefit, that is a perfectly reasonable conclusion to the challenges there, so long as those freedom of navigation operations remain open to any country or any company who's shipping through the South China Sea.
So you're confident there is a diplomatic way out of this?
I am confident there's a diplomatic way out of this, and I'm concerned both from rhetoric from the Trump administration's Secretary of State, as well as one of his top advisors, and as we equally concerned about rhetoric that comes out of the Chinese government and the PLA on the South China Sea. That kind of rhetoric gets in the way of diplomacy, it doesn't help diplomacy.
Looking at one very broad question on the summit that's going to be taking place in Florida, here we have two leaders, the President of China and the President of the United States, with very different philosophies, very different outlooks. We have President Xi Jinping, who is a champion of globalization. We have President Trump, who's talked about America first. And here we have a summit that's going to be watched very closely, not just in Asia, but around the world. How do you think this summit will resonate internationally?
I have to challenge folks who argue that President Xi's point of view is one of globalization. His rhetoric in Davos was certainly that of globalization. The actions of the Chinese government are not those of globalization. The idea that Chinese companies and Chinese goods are freely accepted and largely freely exported is important. They've done a lot of things, but then China closes its own borders to investment into China. That's not globalization. That's protectionism. So I think actually President Xi and President Trump probably have a lot more in common in their worldview in practice, separate from their rhetoric. So I would say that President Trump's rhetoric and practice are much more aligned. I do think that he believes in America first. I think if he was if he would say something along the lines of America first, but not America only, that would be where most Americans are. So I think his rhetoric, he believes his rhetoric and wants to practice his rhetoric, which I don't think will be great for our economy.
Congressman Rick Larson, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you're very welcome.